On TV, the Andy Griffith Show may appear to be a cozy Southern embrace, but behind the scenes, it was much different. Everyone remembers the innocent visage and beautiful red hair of tiny Opie Ron Howard. Just a child growing up in Mayberry, a charming little town. He was the boy next door in America. In actuality, however, life behind those white picket gates wasn't nearly as idyllic as it appeared. Yes, Don, Andy Griffith, and Ron all shared genuine giggles. Nuts. However, there was also genuine conflict, particularly with regard to one cast member Ron secretly found intolerable. He wasn't alone, either. That same individual was the source of the type of altercation that extended beyond the set. Andy Griffith carried it with him long after the filming was over. He never fully forgiven one battle. This wasn't your average drama from Hollywood, with public outbursts. No, this happened quietly, covertly, and for years, but it was genuine, and it affected all those involved. Don't get it wrong now. Andy Griffith's show was a huge success. It began airing on CBS in 1960 and lasted until 1968, providing us with 249 episodes of charming tiny towns. It was mostly in black and white, and a splash of color was added in recent seasons. However, the emotion remained the same regardless of the hue. Easy, charming, and sentimental. In fact, the show began as a backdoor pilot on the show hosted by Danny Thomas. Andy Taylor, the quiet sheriff of Mayberry, North Carolina, and his small son Opie were the first people we encountered there. It felt like a memory, yet the town was not real. Resembled something from the 1930s rather than the 1960s, and Andy was just like that. Griffith enjoyed it. It belonged to a bygone era. He previously claimed that people fell in love with that era because of Barney Fife's eccentric yet endearing personality, which was expertly portrayed by Don Knotts, Aunt Bee's steady and kind hand, and Opie's intelligence, honesty, and curiosity. Viewers perceived them as family, yet they had issues off camera. In actuality, people did not get along. While everyone maintained a professional demeanor, there were underlying animosities, particularly one that went deep between Andy Griffith and a cast member. For decades, it remained out of the public eye, but it never truly disappeared. The show was unstoppable despite all of that turbulence behind the scenes. In the Nielsen ratings, it never fell below 7th place. And it emerged victorious in the end, in '68. That was literally only accomplished by two other TV series in history, Seinfeld and I Love Lucy. Oddly enough, despite carrying the show, Andy Griffith never received an Emmy for his performance. However, Aunt Bee, Frances Bevere, and Don Knotts each took home 6. And with good reason. They were really intelligent. Fans continued to commemorate the show's legacy through spin-offs like Gomer Pyle, USMC, a 1986 reunion film, and Mayberry RFD. Evidence that Mayberry continues to have a particular place in people's hearts, despite its non-existence, is presented annually at a festival in Andy's hometown of Mount Airy, North Carolina. However, Ron Howard was already looking to the future while the rest of the world was clinging to Mayberry. He had outgrown the front porch and the fishing pole. In the background, he was developing a completely new career. Behind the camera this time, he was more than OP. No longer. He was rising to prominence as a director in Hollywood. And that's what makes the Andy Griffith Show so funny. People were led to believe in a picture-perfect small village that was full of joy and love. The true narrative, however, is one of complex characters, unspoken rivalries, and a young actor who saw through the deception to establish his own reality. You would think that Ron Howard would have taken a vacation after the Andy Griffith Show ended, perhaps going off to be a normal kid for a bit, but he didn't. He was already well known, even though other children were still learning how to ride a bike. And he continued to go forward without slowing down. Prior to becoming the acclaimed filmmaker that we all know today, Ron was Opie, America's favorite redhead child. However, Ron had already established himself in the entertainment industry before Mayberry called. Acting was more than just a pastime in his family when he was born in Duncan, Oklahoma, on March 1, 1954. The family owned the company. Rance Howard, his father, was a director, writer, and actor. When he entered the entertainment industry, she genuinely changed his name from Rance Beckenholt. Rance was in the Air Force when Ron was born, but there was always a performance component to the plan. Jean Spiegel Howard, Ron's mother, was also an actress. Therefore, it's safe to conclude that he was already in the spotlight. Ron was of German, English, Scottish, Irish, and Dutch ancestry. His iconic all-American appearance, which made him ideal for the wholesome roles he would play as a child. His life was divided between studio lights and school lights from the beginning. He received on-set tutoring at locations such as Desilu Studios. He also went to Burbank's regular public schools when he wasn't filming. He later became a student at the School of Cinematic Arts at USC. Not too bad, but let's be honest by then. The man was on his way already. By the age of 5? 5 indeed. Ron had previously starred in TV series and films that most adult performers would only dream about. He made appearances on The Twilight Zone, Dennis the Menace, The DuPont Show, and The Many Loves of Dobie Gillis after landing his first major motion picture part in The Journey. This child was more than just a lovely little face. He was incredibly talented, but the role that made all the difference. Opie was that person. He was cast as Andy Taylor's kid on the Andy Griffith program in 1960. Suddenly, everyone was familiar with Ronnie Howard. He grew up there in front of America as Opie throughout all 8 seasons. Ron recalled his first day on set years later. You would anticipate a nervous moment or some sort of magic that takes place behind the scenes. He was merely a child, however, playing with a small toy turtle. He recalled having to think and act as though it was dead for a moment. That easygoing, serene vibe was kind of amusing. That was precisely the focus of the Andy Griffith program. In the greatest possible way, it's straightforward, kind, and gentle. The show never leaned. Although airing during a rather turbulent period in American history, it remained grounded in this tranquil, romanticized past even as it entered the drama of the 1960s. With Frances Bavier as the kind Aunt Bee, Don Knotts as the foolish but endearing Barney Fife, and an entire village full of eccentric characters, Mayberry has the feel of a place you wish existed. Despite being nominated multiple times and winning 6 acting Emmys between Knotts and Bavier, the show did not win an Emmy for Best Comedy. Quite remarkable, correct? And Ron simply continued. He appeared on Happy Days, another TV classic, in 1974. You would think he would be done with sitcoms by now. However, he immediately assumed the part of the polished, stereotypically American teenager Richie Cunningham. It began as a love, American-style sketch before taking off as a successful television show. Richie was the ideal counterpoint to Henry Winkler's Fonzie, the show's standout character. Although they were completely different from Richie, leather jacket, cool attitude, they had a genuine chemistry, off-screen as well as on-screen. In the real world, they were friends. And Happy Days became a cultural phenomenon thanks of that relationship. However, Ron had more in mind than just acting even as Happy Days was being filmed. He was observing what went on behind the camera, how scenes were assembled, and how narratives were delivered. Already, he had visions of directing. And everything really started to take off once he entered that world. The fact that Ron Howard's filmmaking career began with a car accident is, sort of poetic. But not literally. There were a number of them in his debut movie, Grand Theft Auto. The year was 1977. Furthermore, Ron wasn't quite Spielberg yet. People still pointed at him and asked, "Hey, isn't that Opie?" But he was moving behind the scenes. It wasn't a beautiful red carpet scene when he made his directorial debut. The trade-off was part of a shrewd handshake agreement with Roger Corman, the famed B-movie king. Ron would play the lead in a quick and low-budget movie. If Corman allowed him to direct one of his own, it would be called Eat My Dust. Because there's nothing more wholesome than wrecking cars with your father, Ron agreed and wrote Grand Theft Auto with him. Suddenly, Opie had taken a formal step behind the camera. After that, he felt as though someone had set a fire beneath him. Ron began his career as a TV movie director for NBC in the late 1970s and early 1980s. Screen icon Bette Davis starred in one of them, Skyward. Now picture this. One of Hollywood's most recognizable and scary films was directed by Ron Howard, who was just in his 20s. Actresses talk about being put through a trial by fire, but he stood his ground and demonstrated that he wasn't just a lucky kid star. After that, Night Shift really took off in 1982. It was perfect, crazy, and wild. Shelley Long, Henry Winkler, and Michael Keaton in full manic glory feature in this comedy. The Fonz himself, indeed. That film demonstrated more than simply Ron's directing skills. Chops demonstrated his expert ability to strike a balance between chaos and emotion. People were beginning to think, well, perhaps he has something here, at that very moment. Splash, a mermaid romantic comedy starring Tom Hanks, Daryl Hannah, Eugene Levy, and John Candy, was released by Ron in 1984. It had romance, imagination, and gags about fish. What more is there to ask for? It was a box office success and demonstrated Ron Howard's versatility. Make you feel, make you laugh, and bring in Hollywood cash. It's quite remarkable when you consider it. He's a 5-year-old pretending to be a plastic 1 minute. On the Andy Griffith Show, Turtle is dead. The next, he's guiding Tom Hanks as he falls in love with a legendary marine animal. Growth, however, Ron had a front row seat to something even uglier before all the accolades, the box office successes, and the directorial legend status. The actual turmoil on the Andy Griffith Show's set. And no, we're not referring to Ernest T. Bass rock throwing or Otis, the local alcoholic. We're discussing a long-running conflict that outlasted most TV comedies. On screen, Sheriff Andy Taylor and Aunt Bee, America's favorite TV aunt and uncle, exude warmth, comfort, and cornbread. Off-screen, yikes. It was cold, almost icy. Two of the most recognizable figures in mid-century television were Andy Griffith and Frances Bevier. Warm, knowledgeable, and always prepared with a life lesson, their characters made viewers feel like family. But those fuzzy feelings quickly vanished when the cameras stopped rolling. As it happened, Andy and I didn't get along at all. It was more of a polite tension that could freeze your coffee than a dramatic, shouting match. Frances was quite serious about her work, very private, and not into backslaps or light conversation. Conversely, Andy was gregarious, jovial, and enjoyed making jokes. In essence, he was all barbecue and she was all business. She was viewed as challenging by some, but it wasn't that easy. Frances had expectations. She didn't have much patience for what she saw as goofing off because she took her work seriously. According to director and co-star Howard Morris, collaborating with her was like negotiating a minefield. For camera framing, ask her to shift a few inches. You may receive a courteous nod or a flurry of activity. Depending on the day, yes. Things weren't always sunshine and rainbows on set, as even Ron Howard, who had nothing but respect for Andy Griffith, recalled. But the story doesn't end there. Years after the show's conclusion, Andy made a brave decision. Prezo Kinsaw's Skajak was where he first appeared. He appeared at my mouse case by Prezo Kinsaw. We might blow her away and leave a lasting impression. Get over my Prezod. Make Maze up. Maze make up. Maze up Prez Maze Prezo with makeup May. We reconcile. Make up by Prezo. Gout off. Run into each other. Why Skled? Guansaret. Perhaps it will go Ka Baipz. They see Zi before. Sully it it's tz 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 Frances Bevier's house uninvited, trying to patch things up. Sounds good, doesn't it? Frances, regrettably, didn't agree. Andy Griffith showing up on her porch likely felt more like a house invasion than a landmark occasion since she valued her privacy. It didn't work out. However, life has a humorous way of changing our viewpoint. Frances was fighting cancer in her final years. It might have been the solitude of retirement. Perhaps it was reflection. However, she became softer. She called Andy after picking up the phone. Just a genuine dialogue without any makeup or scripting. She also expressed regret. I apologize that our relationship didn't improve. I'm to blame, she informed him. Their lengthy, complex history came to an end with that one deed that had been planned for years. Later on, Andy talked about how much it meant to him. It was one of those occasions when you are reminded that humans are just people, flawed, arrogant, and occasionally hesitant to speak up for what is right. At the age of 86, Frances Bevier died in 1989. She passed away in a small, peaceful community in North Carolina, despite having been born in New York City. She helped create the fictional Mayberry, which is located nearby. She lived quietly out of the spotlight and was regarded by the locals as being much kinder, more restrained, and far gentler than the Hollywood tales implied. Like Aunt Bee, she maintained her dignity even in her latter days. The last sequence starring Andy Griffith wasn't shot on a studio. His house on Roanoke Island, North Carolina, was the location. Calm, quiet, a long way from the cameras and the cheers. At the age of 86, he died while sleeping, the same age as Frances Bevier at the time of her death. They never disclosed the cause of death. To be honest, though, it didn't have to be, since what was more important was that he proceeded in the direction that most of us had hoped, surrounded by the location he cherished. His family buried him that same day after a meaningful life. He named his sanctuary there on the island. Just serenity, no show, no Hollywood glitz. It seemed like the real end of an era to fans who grew up watching the Andy Griffith program. Two icons from a more innocent era, Frances and Andy, were no more. Perhaps it was more than just the loss that struck hardest. It served as a reminder that real people existed behind the flawless TV grins that dominated our society. Those who had difficulties. Individuals who weren't always on good terms. Despite their share of icy silences, Andy and Frances ultimately made a better decision. They opted for forgiveness and grace. Who was right or wrong didn't matter. The phone call, the apology, and a straightforward, sincere exchange between two performers who had previously performed together and had now found serenity apart from it were what counted. While Ron Howard's life was slowly coming to an end, something equally significant was taking place. Next to it, a story that never made the news or the tabloids. A tale about love, not the paparazzi photo and dramatic breakups of Hollywood. The authentic sort, the steady type, the kind that few people really find, but that most people wish for. Cheryl Howard and Ron Howard's love. Half a century. They have been wed for that long. Take a moment to process that. Half a century. Ron posted a picture of them standing on a beach at sunset on June 7, 2025. Just two people who have spent the majority of their lives growing up, getting older, and developing together. No red carpet, no glamour. The caption reads, "Just Ron, thankful for the ride, the family, and the memories." Then he compared their love like a serene river. Sometimes quick, sometimes slow, but always onwards motion. And we simply continued paddling, which was their secret. That sums up marriage, doesn't it? Just two California high school students. They met at the age of 16. He had that Opie charm and freckles. He was struck by the quiet strength she possessed. Ron says he knew she was it immediately. He picked her up in his mint green Volkswagen Beetle on their first date. Traditional. Brought her to the cinema. Then going to get pizza. He joked that the car was still in excellent condition years later. We also do. However, Cheryl did not immediately accept marriage. Ron actually had to make 3 attempts. Not because of her lack of love for him. She only wanted to confirm. She had her own dreams. She's a Koa. Wanted to pursue before committing. That was respected by Ron. Perhaps that's why it was successful. Because they were more than simply spouses, they were partners. I do, they said. Just when Happy Days began gaining popularity in 1975. Cheryl was his rock, but it could have been a tornado. Since then, she has been the focal point of their family. Bryce Dallas Howard, their daughter, has described her mother as a natural power. Additionally, Paige, their second daughter, once said she couldn't even explain their affection for Cheryl without becoming sentimental. She is everything. The sun, the moon, the stars. That's the problem. The Howards are not simply another well-known family from Hollywood. They work together as a team. Not only did Cheryl encourage Ron, but she also influenced him. She has supported every new endeavor, every early dawn, and every late night. Always in the story, but not in the spotlight. It hasn't always been simple, and Ron will be the first to admit that. Marriages are not maintained by love alone. Communication, patience, a little bit of luck, and a desire to continue growing together are all necessary. They did it that way. They still do it that way. Through movie premieres, long nights, for children, hundreds of set calls, and experiences that will never be forgotten. Day by day, year after year, they simply continued to pick one another. Probably the most impactful narrative Ron Howard has ever delivered is that one. Ron chose not to participate in the customary anniversary celebrations in 2023. No extravagant presents or fancy dinner reservations. Rather, he accomplished something more significant. He drove a mint green VW Beetle to pick Cheryl up. Yes, the identical one from that location. First date. Taking the scenic road, driving with the windows down, letting the breeze blow, and simply being. There's really no need for words, just them, the road, and silent, steady affection for 50 years. The type that doesn't seek attention. It simply appears each day. That type of love isn't typically celebrated in Hollywood. The Ian's built-in sort. Ron and Cheryl, however, have lived it furiously and completely in between moments. In many respects, Ron's career reflects the same calm fortitude. Although many well-known actors alternate between directing and acting, Ron was able to make a lasting impression by performing both with an air of ease. Most people think of him as the endearing Richie from Happy Days or the cute, red-haired boy from the Andy Griffith program. However, he was already listening intently and learning as much as he could. Early on, he was aware that he would be running the camera rather than merely standing in front of it. His late 1970s directing debut was a bit of a mess. Although it wasn't the video game, Grand Theft Auto had heart and ignited a fire. He worked for years to establish his reputation, occasionally facing criticism from others who questioned whether he had it. Ron played the long game. Even though some of his early films didn't do as well as he had intended, the 2000s then arrived, and along with them, A Beautiful Mind and The Grinch Stole Christmas. The latter marked a sea change. Audiences were moved by the narrative of John Nash, a great, tortured genius. The movie won multiple Oscars. Howard took a step. Take the finest director away. It was his time. There was a catch, though, as with all wonderful tales. Parts of Nash's life were omitted from the film. Hard bits. Messy realities. It was deemed dishonest by critics. Howard acknowledged that he omitted some details in order to concentrate. However, when Nash was personally impacted by the backlash, it struck him hard on the emotional core. That went too far for him since, to Ron, stories are about people, and it's important to safeguard them. Then comes Hillbilly Elegy. J.D. Vance was not a senator at the time. He was just a man with a complicated, unvarnished narrative about having a difficult upbringing. He informed Howard that he saw the human side. However, it hurt to see Vance eventually enter politics and adopt opinions that seemed so dissimilar from the narrative Ron believed he was assisting him in telling. It felt like a bait and switch, not because of politics. Like when someone you trust shows you a different side of themselves that you weren't expecting. And Ron had experienced that emotion before. It transported him back to the Andy Griffith set, where, despite the warm cha